Christopher Sands, and I'm director of the Canada Institute here, one of the two North American institutes at the Wilson Center. Very pleased to be here in conjunction with my partner in good and in crime, Andrew Rudman, who's director of the Mexico Institute. We're very pleased today to be able to host a preview of the North American Leaders Summit taking place on Monday and Tuesday of next week. And it is my honor to be able to introduce to you someone very important, Ambassador Mark Green. Many of you will know Ambassador Green has the kind of CV that even makes people who live in Washington jealous. Member of Congress, member of Cabinet as head of the USAID. He served as a member of the Millennium Challenge Corporation Board, as president and CEO of the International Republican Institute, of the McCain Institute. He has been a champion of democracy, a champion of American foreign policy and American foreign policy values, and is now president and CEO of the Woodrow Wilson Center. And it's my honor to turn the podium over to you, Ambassador Green, to introduce our speaker today.
Thanks, Chris, for that overly generous introduction. I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2005, President George W. Bush invited the President of Mexico and the Prime Minister of Canada to his beloved ranch in Texas for a frank yet optimistic conversation about the neighborhood and its future. And the North American Leaders Summit was born. And to his great credit, President Biden has revived this annual gathering. He did so in 2021. And he brought in Prime Minister Trudeau and this year's summit host, President Lopez Obrador. On the occasion of 2021, President Biden said this about the summit's purpose. It's about what we can do in partnership and mutual respect to strengthen our region and to prove that democracies can deliver in the second quarter of the 21st century, including by increasing supply chain resilience and reliance, worker protections, improving cybersecurity, and helping small and medium businesses thrive here in North America. This 10th summit underscores the recognition by these three leaders that there are issues confronting our governments, our countries, and our peoples that must be addressed collectively, that can only be addressed collectively, if we're going to share in the prosperity to which we are all entitled, if we're going to tap into the opportunity that there is throughout this region. The agenda for next week's meeting includes diversity and inclusion, environmental challenges and climate catastrophes, economic competitiveness, migration, health, and security. These are complicated topics. They do not respect geographic boundaries or nationalities. Collective action from our three governments and leaders like those who are here today is the best way to respond to these threats and to capitalize in the opportunities that I think we all see. Over the past year, the scholars of the Wilson Center have conducted research on all of these topics. In our two institutes dedicated to North America, Canada and the Mexico Institute, while they're each preeminent with their portfolio and in their sector, when they come together to take on those cross-cutting issues like issues on the implementation of USMCA, well, from my perspective, that's golden. That's as good as it gets. Because of this work, because of the importance of these issues, our guest today is regularly cited in conversations and publications here at the Wilson Center. And I promise nearly always in polite language, nearly always. All kidding aside, we are delighted to welcome again in person for a preview of the North American Leaders Summit, my friend, Ambassador Brian Nichols. We're excited to hear what he expects will happen when the leaders get together on Monday and Tuesday. What are the issues that he believes will emerge, and what are some of the answers that we hope will come out of these sessions? My friend is the Assistant Secretary for Western Hemispheric Affairs, and he is truly a diplomatic all-star. He has served as ambassador to Zimbabwe, ambassador to Peru. His career in the Foreign Service has included senior posts at U.S. embassies in Colombia, El Salvador, Indonesia, and Mexico as well. He has always been generous with his time, and so we are delighted to have him. Ambassador, you know the world, and you also know where you come from, the U.S. and the North American neighborhood. Thank you for being here, and I will turn the floor over to you. Thank you, Ryan.
So Ambassador Green has eloquently summed up the North American Leaders Summit, so thanks very much. This is a really important moment for our region, for our hemisphere, and the heart of our hemisphere is North America and the relationship that we have with Mexico and Canada, our two largest trading partners, and we are their largest trading partner. And obviously, the familial and cultural ties between our countries run incredibly deep. The resumption of the NALS process, as Ambassador Green mentioned, with the 9th North American Leaders Summit in Washington, with the 3 leaders pledged to end the COVID-19 pandemic, advance global health, foster competitiveness, create conditions for equitable and sustainable growth, address migration, and promote development in the most marginalized communities, took place a little over a year ago. The accomplishments from that conversation between our leaders, that engagement, and the really dynamic effort at a whole of government level produced some 40 concrete outcomes. And I'm going to go through them, not all 40, but just to give you a sense, because I think it matters where we're building from and not just let you think that it's all emerging from our collective forehead on Monday. So the last North American Leaders Summit, the leaders agreed to advance global health with the North American Plan for Animal and Pandemic Influenza, which launched a North America Pandemic Supply Chain Dialogue and facilitated access to medical countermeasures and other critical supplies to respond to the current and future health crises. To foster North American competitiveness, we strengthen small and medium enterprise linkages by creating a network of SME experts across North America to share best practices on mentorship and training, and to consolidate SMEs for trade and export. To raise climate ambition, we enhance cooperation on the clean energy transition by identifying and promoting policy and regulatory tools, enhancing supply chains, convening stakeholders, developing border infrastructure, and electrifying government fleets and public transport. To create the conditions for inclusive, equitable growth, we advocated the prevention and response to violence against Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit and gender diverse people. This included a meeting of Indigenous women leaders in preparation for the 4th Trilateral Working Group on Violence Against Indigenous Women and Girls. To increase coordination on migration, development, and security, USAID, Global Affairs Canada, and the Mexican Agency for International Development and Cooperation, MEXID, developed an action plan on shared development activities in Central America. We are establishing a trilateral partnership to address the root causes of irregular migration and forced displacement using a human rights-centered approach. To advance equity and racial justice, we participated in ongoing trilateral engagement to work towards the development of a North American partnership for racial equity and inclusion. So, Monday, what are we doing? Well, Sunday, we're flying down there. Monday, Mexican President López Obrador will host President Biden, Prime Minister Trudeau for the 10th North American Leaders Summit. The 3 leaders will meet together on Monday to promote a common vision for North America. And then we will have separate meetings between the leaders bilaterally. President Biden meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau and President López Obrador. The leaders will have a very intimate dinner between the 3 of them with their spouses. And they'll, in addition to the sort of formal, larger engagements, they really will have an opportunity to share ideas and concerns, much in the way that Mark described that first summit, which was a very much smaller, intimate affair, and it's grown over time. But there are opportunities to have those very casual and private conversations. So our three countries have agreed on deliverables across 6 pillars for this year's analysis, and those include diversity, equity, and inclusion, climate and environment, competitiveness, migration and development, health, and regional security. So President Biden will follow up last year's robust announcements with new initiatives and announcements across a broad range of issues, which will include deepening and expanding our security cooperation to combat drug trafficking through the North American Drug Dialogue, including efforts to increase information sharing on precursor chemicals and strengthening our public health approaches for prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and recovery services. We will promote labor mobility, recognizing the region's potential as one of the most important labor markets on a global level. We will redouble efforts to address climate and environmental challenges by undertaking efforts to reduce methane emissions in the waste sector and decarbonize public transportation. We will work together to strengthen and expand North American supply chains for semiconductors, critical minerals, and electric vehicle batteries. And we will take additional steps to jointly address irregular migration in the region, including through continued implementation of the principles outlined in the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection, particularly expanding legal pathways. And I'm sure all of you have been following the announcement that came out yesterday from the White House in that regard. These investments in North America benefit the United States, and by taking advantage of the game-changing legislation under the Biden administration, including the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act and the Science Act, CHIPS and Science Act, excuse me, President Biden will use NOWs to keep driving North America's economic competitiveness and promote inclusive growth and prosperity. This is an exciting moment in our relationship. We're moving forward across a broad set of issues, and I look forward to answering your questions and having a conversation about the nows and about our shared future in the region.
Sit and take questions or stand from the podium? What's easier for you?
I'll sit.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, and it's me again, Chris Sands, but I'm going to just moderate and hopefully get all the questions in. We know that there are at least 450 people signed up to be watching this live streaming, so hello to all of you. So it's a bigger crowd than it seems. I hope you don't feel too nervous. We'll take questions.
Not until now.
Yes. All right, sorry. I'm screwing this job up already. I have a question for the young lady over there. Do we have a mic to move? Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you. Somebody knows what they're doing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Scotty Greenwood, Canadian American Business Council. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Wilson, for hosting. You mentioned labor mobility, and one of the things from a Canada-U.S. perspective about getting back and forth across the border that has actually been a step backwards from our perspective in recent years is a disagreement between Canada and the United States about Nexus, the Trusted Traveler program. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about where we are with Nexus. I know a lot of members of Congress, once they get their speaker elected, are going to get back together and talk to the administration about that. But I wanted to know about if you have any thoughts about that particular Trusted Traveler program or trusted travel generally between Canada, the United States, and Mexico as a part of mobility, not really labor mobility like you talked, but mobility generally. Also, unrelated, I haven't heard any mention of, and I just wonder if anybody's thinking about it, for North America, regulatory cooperation. That's something that has been on the agenda at various bilats and trilats, and I wonder if anybody's talking about that at this particular round or not. Thanks.
Thanks very much. So the Nexus program and Trusted traveler programs broadly are important in facilitating travel across our shared borders. The Nexus program provides benefit to the Canadian traveler and to Americans by allowing Canadians to easily enter the United States to engage in commerce, buy our goods, go to border cities and see the giant box retailers right on the border. You recognize that we have a great friend in Canada. So the issue with Nexus is one that we hope that we can solve. It's and I think we're making important progress. The Department of Homeland Security leads those conversations. And just to be clear, the issue is the privileges and immunities for the DHS employees who would work at the Nexus enrollment centers in Canada. Right now, there's a difference of opinion, shall we say, on how that would be implemented and making sure that our U.S. government employees at those centers receive the same privileges and immunities that people receive at pre-clearance facilities at airports, for example. Those conversations are ongoing between the Canadian government and DHS. We hope that those will be resolved quickly. It's important for both our countries. I'm optimistic that this will be resolved. Turning to the regulatory harmonization issue, that is one where it is at the heart of some of the conversations that we have about our shared prosperity, promoting our shared prosperity and competitiveness in our hemisphere. We will soon be able to announce more details for America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity, which President Biden announced during the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles last summer. But central to our conversations with our Mexican and Canadian partners, as well as more broadly in promoting economic growth and prosperity in our hemisphere, is regulatory harmonization. And it will be particularly important as we look at the continued integration of our supply chains in North America, where we have the most integrated supply chains in our hemisphere. And I would argue the only real rival to that level of integration is the European Union. So we recognize this is an opportunity that has not been fully realized in terms of the regulatory harmonization, and we want to take advantage of that opportunity to promote greater growth, good paying jobs, and economic security for the people of our region.
Thank you, Ambassador Leila Abed, and then we'll come to you.
Welcome to the Wilson Center, Mr. Assistant Secretary, once again. It's a pleasure to have you here. The question that I have for you is if the White House is concerned about democratic backsliding in Mexico and how that could hinder future results on the NALs, but also on the bilateral agenda between Mexico and the United States.
So we have a very dynamic and positive engagement with Mexico across a whole host of issues. I think President Biden and President Lopez Obrador at a personal level have an excellent relationship. They certainly some of the proposed policies that President Lopez Obrador has put forward within Mexico are undergoing robust debate in the Mexican Congress. Mexico remains a vibrant democracy. People are expressing their views. The Mexican judiciary also has an important role to play in some of the legislation that's been put forward in Mexico. And we trust Mexican institutions to play their roles appropriately. And we deeply respect the Mexican people, and these are their decisions to make about the policies and the future in their country.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, we're rushing you a microphone. Sorry about that.
Hi, I'm Emily Meredith. I'm a reporter with Energy Intelligence. And you mentioned climate and environment is one of the pillars for the summit next week. There's this ongoing dispute under the USMCA over the Lopez Obrador government's approach to electricity and energy sector reforms and permitting issues that have affected U.S. companies. So can you talk a bit about how this dispute interacts with those climate and energy goals that you have for the summit, and whether or not you expect any breakthroughs on the dispute, or the U.S. might move towards an arbitration panel?
So we're very much engaged in a process of technical and expert level conversations between U.S. trade representative and the Mexican counterpart. Those conversations are in their own separate channel. That's part of the USMCA dispute resolution process. The United States, Mexico, and Canada have each availed themselves of this mechanism in other opportunities in the past with regard to each of the other countries. So this is not a new or unique feature, but it does run in its own sort of technical channel. I would say broadly about energy, and particularly how energy intersects with climate and renewables. We see tremendous opportunities between Mexico, the United States, and Canada in renewable energy integration. There's a major investment that Mexico's carrying out in solar energy and renewables in Sonora. Mexico also produces lithium, and in terms of our relationship with Canada, the Canadian Northwest is a great source of hydroelectric power for Canada and the United States, and we're in the process of renegotiating the Columbia River Treaty, which will govern that process with Canada. Collectively, our engagement in climate issues and renewable energy, I think, not only reflects the commitment of each of the leaders to a greener, more sustainable future, but also the really unique opportunities that we have in North America to make that a reality. And I know that the leaders are very excited to talk about that issue in Mexico City on Monday and Tuesday.
I have a question from the young lady here on this side, and then we'll come around to you, gentleman next there. Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm trying to alternate between sides.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, Kat Robinson with Pfizer. Thank you to the Wilson Center, the two institutes for hosting this, and to the Assistant Secretary for making time. I'm sure he's scrambling to get ready for the summit next week. Assistant Secretary, I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more. You mentioned that health was one of the 6 pillars, and wanted to understand a little bit more. What are the deliverables specifically on health? What is it focused on? And then secondly, is it related to supply chains? When you mentioned looking to expand and strengthen supply chains and critical minerals, chips, et cetera, I didn't hear pharmaceuticals mentioned, but I know in the previous summit, pharmaceuticals was on the agenda, so I would just appreciate any further detail there. Thank you.
Well, one of the things that has made the preparation for this summit more pleasant than the preparation for the preceding iteration is that we set the groundwork, and I talked about that somewhat in my opening remarks. And pandemic response and healthcare is something that the leaders really focused on in 2021. And this summit, it's an opportunity to reinforce that message that we need to be prepared to address not only the it's still not over pandemic, as well as future pandemics. I've seen reporting on new variants. Obviously, we're following with great interest the situation in China with their policies, which means that, and sort of collectively, that means that the world has to be attentive to these global health concerns. Beyond the issue of pharmaceuticals and vaccines, there's also many other medical supply chain issues that will form part of our conversations. And I would also refer you back to the announcements and pillars that came out of the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, where there was extensive conversation about these issues and our hemispheric-wide efforts to integrate health supply chains, ensure training of health workers across our hemisphere, access to vaccines and other necessary pharmaceuticals, and that effort continues apace. I look forward, I think, next week to the swearing in of a new director of the Pan American Health Organization, and that will be an early topic for us to engage with the new leadership at PAHO on.
Excellent. Gentleman here.
Ambassador, thank you for your time. Some people, as you mentioned, describe the policy that was presented yesterday by the White House as the first comprehensive strategy to manage the border. But those same voices mentioned that this policy relies heavily on the Title 42. I was wondering if, with your conversation with the Mexican counterparts, the Mexican side requests anything to manage the migrants that are going to be expelled under this title, and your personal views. Do you think that U.S. Policy border should rely on a health order to enforce the law?
So the first thing that I would say is the Biden administration is deeply committed to a legal, orderly, safe migration and managing our border in a way that does not put people at risk and allowing legal pathways for people to migrate to and work in the United States and in other countries. And that's a conversation we have with both our Canadian and our Mexican counterparts. They have both been exceptionally supportive and creative in their own acceptance of migrants, whether Canada, and they've done extraordinary things to receive Afghan and Ukrainian migrants as well as migrants from our own hemisphere, as well as Mexico, which has done extraordinary things to provide humanitarian support to migrants within their territory. Both countries work with us extensively to share information. The announcement that was made yesterday, which provides new legal pathways, the website is up, it's working. Thousands of people have already applied, and it's been a day. The application is free, there's no cost. That comes in contrast to people playing migrant smugglers, polleros, coyotes, you can use whatever term you want, thousands of dollars for a risky journey with no guarantee of entry into the United States, and more likely the risk of suffering crime, injury, attack, and eventually ending up deported back to your home country. So I think that the policies that the president has announced will provide legal pathways for some 30,000 people a month from countries where there's a significant demand. And that will prevent people from putting their lives at risk through a perilous journey, often trying to navigate the Darien Gap. I feel that this is an important step forward in orderly and safe migration management and giving people the opportunity to fill needed jobs in our country. And I also believe that as this conversation on migration takes place, we have to keep in mind that it's taking place within the context of unprecedented levels of migration throughout our hemisphere and globally. Never in human history have more migrants been on the move than they are right now. And this is a challenge not only for the United States, but a challenge for Mexico, Canada, the countries of Central America. We've had this conversation before about the challenges in South America, where multiple countries have over 1 million migrants in them, whether it's Colombia, Ecuador, Peru. So this is something that collectively as a hemisphere and globally we will continue to work on, building on the structure of the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection. And I know that the leaders will have a robust conversation about that in Mexico City on Monday and Tuesday.
Thank you very much, gentlemen here.
Thank you, Ambassador Nichols. My name is Justin Margolis with the Quebec office here in Washington, and one of the regional hotspots that we're concerned about is Haiti. I'm wondering if you can expand on any of the regional hotspots, Haiti, Venezuela, and how those will figure into the discussions in Mexico City.
So our cooperation with Canada and Mexico to support the Haitian people is longstanding. It forms part of our conversation on a regular basis. All three countries have provided assistance and training to Haitian security forces. We've provided humanitarian assistance to the Haitian people to address the recent cholera outbreak in Haiti. And we've worked collectively and individually to promote reconciliation among the Haitian political class. Mexico has just left its membership, its rotating membership in the UN Security Council. While on the council for 2 years, our Mexican partners worked closely with us on Haiti issues. Similarly, Canada chairs the UN General Assembly Ad Hoc Committee on Haiti. Canadian Permanent Representative Bob Ray was just in Haiti in December, working toward understanding and encouraging progress there. The way forward in Haiti does depend on all Haitians coming together to agree on a path forward toward elections. While the international community supports Haiti to provide the security necessary to do so, Prime Minister Henry has a consensus agreement that is on the table, and many actors in Haitian society signed on to that agreement. I would encourage others to do so, and I would encourage the Prime Minister as well as other leaders of all walks of society to be flexible in their approach, to work toward consensus, to not insist on absolute solutions as they go forward to forge an agreement and a way forward toward elections so that Haitians can vote and select their own leadership. The Western Hemisphere is not at a loss for democratic challenges at the moment. We encourage the opposition unitary platform in Venezuela and the Maduro regime to come together and continue their negotiations. We welcome the humanitarian agreement that they reached in November and believe that an agreement between the unitary platform and the Maduro regime on political issues towards an election in 2024 that follows democratic norms and standards and adopts the recommendations laid out in the European Union Electoral Observation Mission report is an important way forward, and we stand ready to continue to support that effort, and we're willing to modify our policies in response to concrete progress and concrete changes by the Maduro regime. Similarly, if there's not progress or backsliding, we can reimpose sanctions. It's not a one-way process. The humanitarian and human rights situation in Nicaragua is critical. The Ortega Murillo regime's imprisonment of scores of political prisoners under intolerable conditions is deeply worrisome to the international community, and the OAS and UN human rights institutions have condemned their actions. We continue to urge the Ortega Murillo regime to release immediately and unconditionally political prisoners in that country. And if they do so, there will be things to talk about with them. All of these topics, not to mention the current situation in Peru, are all things that I'm sure the leaders will touch upon as they talk about the region and our collective efforts to promote democracy and stability in the Western Hemisphere.
Thank you very much. We're here with Brian Nichols, who is Ambassador Nichols is Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere, and we're taking questions. I want to come to the young lady here, please.
Thanks, Ambassador. My question is regarding Mexico. You're just talking about the United States and the administration supporting democracies and also talking about democracies and undermining democracies in the region. Are you also going to talk about democracy in Mexico and the changes that are planned at the INE, Instituto Nacional Electoral? Also, press freedom. More journalists were killed last year in Mexico than in any other country in the world. So are these also going to be topics you're going to talk about during the summit?
Well, this was an earlier question, so I'll just repeat that. I believe that Mexico has robust institutions. The proposed changes are under debate within Mexico's Congress. Mexico's judiciary has proven itself independent and capable of ruling on proposed legislation and changes in that country. The Mexican press and public openly debate these issues. We always talk about our shared values in North America and the importance and the priority of respect for institutions and fundamental freedoms in our own countries and around the hemisphere. The United States is by no means perfect. We've seen in our own country challenges. What's today's date? It's January 6th. So we've seen within our own country challenges to democracy. So we discuss these issues from a point of humility and the recognition that none of us is safe from these challenges, and that we all have to work together to strengthen each other's democracy as a collective effort, not as one country preaching to another country, but rather as friends and colleagues working together to support each other.
We have a gentleman here on this side. Oh, sorry, the microphone's coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Pedro Casas from the U.S.-Mexico Foundation. Ambassador Nichols, two questions. First, is the topic about the Mexican banning of GMO corn imports to the country going to be in the agenda? Is this worrisome to you? And second, how does the capture of Ovidio Guzman yesterday is part of the security discussion across the region, if any?
So let me start with the second part first. First, we want to congratulate the Mexican authorities for their courageous arrest of Ovidio Guzman. The security challenges that we jointly face are not insignificant, and the bravery of Mexican law enforcement, police, prosecutors, judges, corrections officials, public officials, as we've seen, I'm sure you've seen the same videos that I have about the situation in Culiacan and broader Sinaloa in the wake of that arrest, demonstrate that it requires significant bravery to carry out these moves. And I congratulate Mexican authorities, the Mexican public for demonstrating that. Our cooperation to address the threat of drug trafficking is deep and broad. One of the first things that I did upon entering into my current position was travel to Mexico for our high-level security dialogue and the signing of the bicentennial framework on security cooperation. And that framework gives us an agreed way forward to address these challenges. Among the things that our leaders will discuss within that context is the threat of fentanyl, which has quickly become the leading illicit export from Mexico to the United States, and the leading cause of death for Americans 18 to 49. The cooperation that we have collectively to deal with fentanyl cannot just extend to the United States, Mexico, and Canada. It requires global effort. The precursors to produce fentanyl come from around the world, and we'll discuss how do we broaden that conversation. With regard to the issue of corn, similarly, that is a trade expert conversation. It's within its own channel of trade and agricultural experts. We believe that we have ample scientific and legal basis for our position that corn exports from the United States to Mexico should continue and can do so in a safe way that respects Mexican law and tradition. But that's a conversation that the experts are having. I'm sure you're aware that there was a delegation of Mexican officials that came to Washington late last year to have this conversation. Those conversations will continue, but that's in its own track outside the Leaders Summit.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Ambassador, while I have you, you've mentioned the Summit of the Americas, which the U.S. hosted in June of last year a couple of times. How did the summits relate to each other? I mean, that was, in some ways it seems, and this is just watching the State Department from the outside, that it's summit after summit after summit, and some of the characters change and the stage changes, but it seems like an ongoing dialogue in a lot of ways. Specifically with Summit of the Americas to this summit, the North American Leaders Summit, how do you see the continuities and maybe discontinuities? What's special about the summit and what continues as a conversation that the president and others have been having for a while?
Sure. There are broad themes and specific goals and objectives that continue throughout our foreign policy engagement. You can look at the national security strategy of the United States. You can look at Secretary Blinken's speech on democracy and our relations with the Hemisphere in Quito, Ecuador, from October of 21. And you see that we are working to achieve a number of goals, but the sort of heart of our efforts are delivering better options for average men and women in our hemisphere and making sure that access to opportunity, improved security, and most of all, democratic options are available to people in our region. those conversations, whether they're conversations at a bilateral level. I'll note that while we're in Mexico City, there'll be a high-level dialogue between the United States and Honduras in Tegucigalpa that my colleague, the Undersecretary for Citizen Security, Azra Zaya, will be leading. And many of these same issues will be a part of that conversation with Honduras. So these manifest themselves in all of our engagements throughout the hemisphere. The Summit of the Americas encompassed a year of, well, more than a year of intense negotiations and dialogue on shared goals for our hemisphere among 30 plus countries in the region. And the 5 pillars that came out of the formal summit process reflect that, whether it's democracy, healthcare, green energy and climate. We're all encompassed in that for all the countries. The United States role in announcing our own actions in support of that broader agenda was something that President Biden and Secretary Blinken highlighted in their interventions during the Summit of the Americas. And those themes and the specific actions that we are doing to advance them, whether it's supply chain integration, regional migration management, supporting democratic institutions, will continue to recur in the engagements that we have. And among the conversations and the groups that we bring together to have these conversations, there are no closer partners than Canada and Mexico in these conversations. We don't always agree on every element or every way of accomplishing a goal, but we have deep, meaningful conversations about how to get there, and each country brings real investment and tools to the table to move the ball forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm looking for questions from the audience. Are there any? I'm going to steal one more just because I get to, sorry. And just to ask you a little bit about the second half of the question, which what do you think makes the North American Leaders Summit special? Of all the summits that the president goes to and all the summits you've organized, I mean, you've been on the sidelines and in the front lines of a number of these. What makes this distinctive, different maybe than some of the others that you've seen?
Well, the breadth. I mean, just the 2021 nows with 40 different deliverables. That's a huge number. And that breadth comes from the fact that our societies are integrated in such a way that really is not reflected in our relations with any other countries in the world. I'm also partial to our friends in the Caribbean, and we have deep relations with them. But a sea border is not exactly the same as a land border. And you're from Detroit, yes. And I'm sure you've been to a place I like to call Windsor. Yeah. So the ability to get back and forth across our border, to be able to drive from Ottawa to Ogdensburg, New York, or from Monterey to Dallas, or Tijuana to San Diego, that integration is a really unique element of our relationship. But more broadly, the fact that we are each other's leading trade partners, that there are millions of Americans who can trace their heritage to Mexico. And similarly, there are large American diasporas in Mexico and Canada. I have relatives who are Canadian, shocking as that may be, on my wife's side of the family. That is not unusual. So that really makes these exchanges different because it's a conversation that's a family conversation in a way that often you're not having with other nations. The goodwill to advance our shared future in those conversations is something that really comes across. And my counterparts from Canada and Mexico, I am in constant contact with them. That has been one of the pleasant aspects of my job, is the fact that my counterparts from Canada, Michael Grant and Roberto Velasco from Mexico, I talk to them all the time, days, nights, weekends, but those conversations all take place in the spirit of collaboration, and we feel like we're all on the same team, and that is really enjoyable.
Absolutely. And speaking of the same team, we're all hosting the next World Cup together in 2026.
Why,
That'll be
yes.
exciting. A lot of work. There'll be a summit there too. I'm going to hand it over to my counterpart, the great Andrew Rudman, to close us out.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Nichols. Thanks to all of you. This has been a great conversation, and really, I think that last question really summed up why we're here and why in the Mexico Institute and the Canada Institute we pay so much attention to North America, because it really is the most important region for us. And we're delighted, Assistant Secretary Nichols, that you were able to join us this afternoon. Have a great, safe, productive trip to Mexico, and hopefully we can invite you back to get a readout or talk about NALS 12 or NALS 11, which we hope will be in Canada. So thank you all. Pleasure to have you here this afternoon. Happy New Year. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.